once you have your pinch pot created, and mine is almost there, it's a little bit thick, so I'm just gonna continue pinching a bit more and open it up a little bit more. The thinner we pinch the walls, the weaker and flimsier it's gonna get, so I have to be careful not to go too thin or it won't be able to hold its shape. This clay actually has something called grog in it, and you can actually see some of it right here. These little tiny specks, they're actually pre-fired clay, so bisque fired clay that's ground up and mixed throughout the clay, and it gives it a little bit more sturdiness, and it also makes it less likely to get air pockets and break in the kiln. So it's a real good thing for this project. And I'm just making sure that all the walls are the same thickness. So pinch pot's naturally gonna be a circle-ish when it's finished. If we want our piece to be more squarish or rectangle-ish, from here, we can start to push it into that desired shape. And then before we get too far here, we kind of need to do a quick little check and make sure that our phone will actually fit. And remember, our clay is gonna shrink about 10%. So my pinch pot needs to be a little bit wider because I need to be able to cut a hole and have my phone set inside. I need to give space for the case. So I'm actually gonna pull mine a little wider. Just push inside here with my thumb and try to open up that base a little bit more. So I'm just kind of helping to form that base as more of a rectangle rather than leaving it a circle. So it has a more even sound. I kind of tend to like the rectangle sound better than the oval or the circle sound. So I'm gonna try to open that up a little bit more as a rectangle. Just by gently kind of pulling at the corners, pulling at the edges, trying to make it a little wider. And if you don't want to actually have your phone near the clay, because that could get really messy, you could take a sheet of scrap paper and you could put your phone, let's scoop this little guy over here for a second. You could put your phone on that scrap paper, take a pencil and just trace, come here, trace around, but make sure your pencil is straight up and down. So usually the phone curves in at the bottom, so we need to make sure that it goes all the way to the edge with the case on. And let's do a quick little trace around, and when we come around those edges, stand that pencil up really tall so we get that case in consideration there. And then you can cut this little guy out. I'm just gonna cut a little bit past my pencil line just to be sure that I'm making that space big enough. This doesn't have to be beautiful. We just need it for sizing, making sure we've got enough space for our phone to actually work with this thing, with the idea of that shrinkage that's going to happen when the clay dries. So I could lay that on top and just kind of get an idea and make sure that I've got enough space. You know, looking at that, I might want to pull that out a little bit wider because it's going to be pretty close to the edges. So I think I'll do that. As we're shaping and forming this, if we need to stretch it a little bit more, maybe because it wasn't big enough, and I'm kind of having that problem on mine, so I'm going to show you. I've got a couple of spots that got kind of thin because I had to pull these corners out a bit for that shape I wanted. So if that happens to you, you can take a little bit of clay, just like a little bit at a time, like a thumbprint, or you could even roll this into a little coil. Depending on the shape of the thin spot, and you can press it on the inside of your piece and make sure to really press it on there flat, not to trap any air. And then we can spread that on, support it from the outside with your hands while you kind of spread and smooth it onto the inside. And you can thicken up a thin spot that way, add a little bit more clay to it. So I would continue to smooth that out until I don't see any of those thumbprints or any evidence that I added that there. So I want to keep smoothing it and blending it so it all becomes one surface. Okay, I'm gonna give it one last check, just for sizing. I'm not too concerned with this roughness here. I'll show you how to fix that in just a second. I'm just looking at the sizing now, kind of deciding which side I want to be up. And I wouldn't want to store it on its side right now, and I don't know if you can really see this, because when I do that, it kind of sags down. It's not strong enough to hold itself up yet. So when I put this away for the day, I want to make sure it's sitting on its bottom so that the sides kind of stay from slacking in, because I don't want it to dry like that, unless I do want it to dry like that, because that's the shape I want. So I'm just checking for the size of the opening, and I think that looks pretty good. That'll give my phone enough space at the back, and then I can continue to build onto the front later. And there's a few different ways we can do that. So if I am all set and ready with the shape, the size, maybe I've run out of time, this is all I'm gonna get done today. I'll show you how to package it up the right way. If you're gonna use a damp sponge, make sure you do it about 5 or 10 minutes before you pack this up for the day. We don't want to pack up clay that's shiny and wet. So I'm just gonna use a damp sponge to soften, kind of re-moisten these edges here, because they're a little bit cracked. It doesn't really matter visually how that looks, because I'm going to be adding on to that later, but I just want it to be wet enough to be able to join with the other pieces that I'm going to add on. And if it gets too dry, it's going to get really hard to join it together. And you can see some of the grog kind of coming to the surface. Those little bits, they kind of look like sand. That's okay, don't worry about those. They will help everything hold together. They will keep those air pockets from forming, so those are a good thing. If you see a lot of it starting to come to the surface, it might mean that you're over sponging, so stop. And that looks good right there. So it's just a little bit more wet so that the next time I continue working on this, I can add to it without having to kind of struggle with that dryness there, because dry clay is not going to want to grab onto other clay, and we need to do that if we want to add on any height. And to pack up our clay, I want to keep this maybe in my sketchbook so that I can use this for cutting out my phone slot later. So I'm just going to set that off to the side. I'm going to set my clay off to the side for a minute. And you're going to want to take a bag. I would suggest just writing your name on this bag. Check for any holes. If there's holes, you can put a piece of tape over them. If there's another name on it already, you can just cross it off so we know that's not the current owner of the bag, and we can write our name. That way, if somebody opens up this bag thinking it might be theirs, maybe they put it on the wrong shelf or whatever, and as they're unpacking their piece, if your name is all over it, they might rethink what's happening, because I know there's been a few cases of missing clay. So put your name on it a few times with one of these permanent markers. We're gonna open up our bag. So we're looking at the inside of the bottom, like so. So pull up those handles like you've got a ghost bag of groceries sitting in front of you. So this bag is kind of sitting up on its own. I'm gonna put my piece on, whoopsie, come here, the inside of the very bottom center, okay? And then I'm going to gently help the plastic touch the clay everywhere. I don't want any air between the bag and the clay if possible. So I'm just kind of helping it to touch all the outside of that clay, so it makes contact. And then I'm gonna help this extra bit of bag, I'm gonna help fold it down on the inside of my piece, one edge at a time. kind of help it down inside so that the plastic is touching the inside of the clay as well. Boop, 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 boop. Really gently kind of press it so it's right up against the clay as much as we can. No gaps of air between. And then this extra part of the bag, you can twist and kind of just push it down inside. Or if it's not the right shape and that won't work for yours, you can twist and pull this extra part of the handle down and around and set your piece on top. But most likely you're gonna have be able to kind of push that extra bag down inside. And as long as you twist it and push it down inside, then we've made it so that as little air as possible is touching our clay. So it should look something like that. We should be able to see the shape of our clay, kind of feel the surface of the clay through the bag. And if you want to write your name one more time, just for fun, that way somebody can see it or you can see it really quick when you're looking. Just make sure not to push hard with your marker here because it can dent the clay. So just be gentle with it, kind of push with a light pressure, and then you can set it in on your shelf